In 1943, Hollywood director George Stevens was making audiences laugh with romantic comedies. By 1945, his camera was documenting the end of the world. Stevens led a special coverage unit through Nazi Germany, filming in color what most of the world would only see in black and white, if they saw it at all. His lens captured the fall of Berlin, the faces of survivors, the strange rituals of victory and defeat. But Stevens' footage reveals something more disturbing than war's devastation. How quickly human beings adapt to the unthinkable. How easily we create islands of normalcy within oceans of horror. This is the story of how a man who specialized in making people smile learned to bear witness to what they could barely stand to see, and how his camera became the instrument through which we still struggle to understand what we are capable of doing to each other. What Stevens filmed in Berlin wasn't just history, it was a mirror. In the summer of 1945, a Hollywood director named George Stevens walked through the ruins of Berlin with a 16mm camera in his hands. 3 years earlier, he had been filming Ginger Rogers tap dancing across polished floors. Now, he was documenting the end of the world. Stevens had spent his career perfecting the art of make-believe, choreographing romance in swing time, crafting the perfect comedic timing in Woman of the Year. He understood how to make audiences believe in what they were seeing, how to shape reality into something more appealing than truth. But in Berlin, reality had become something no director could have imagined. The Signal Corps had commissioned Stevens in 1943, pulling him from the studios of RKO to lead a special coverage unit through the war's final chapters. Spec Q, they called it, a small team of cameramen and sound engineers whose job was to follow the Allied advance and document whatever they found. Stevens had volunteered for this transformation, but nothing in Hollywood had prepared him for what he would need to see. His camera moves through the Brandenburg Gate, its neoclassical columns pocked with bullet holes, its iron cross still visible, but emptied of all the meaning the Nazis had tried to pour into it. The gate that had once framed parades of jackbooted soldiers now frames only rubble and the occasional figure picking through the debris. Past the Berlin Cathedral, its massive dome cracked open like an egg, Stevens films the Kaiser Wilhelm National Monument, another artifact of German imperial dreams, now standing witness to the collapse of yet another Reich. The monuments remain, but they have become tombstones for the ideologies that built them. Watch Stevens' camera linger on the faces of civilians as they move through this landscape of destruction. These aren't the carefully composed shots of his Hollywood films. His lens wanders, searching, trying to understand what human beings do when their entire world has been reduced to rubble. An elderly man carefully stepping over broken concrete. A woman carrying a child through streets that no longer have names because the street signs have been destroyed along with everything else. The footage captures something most of us have never witnessed. Not just the aftermath of war, but the strange intimacy of watching a civilization try to remember how to be human after it has forgotten what humanity means. These are faces that would never make it into a feature film. Too real, too damaged, too complicated for the clean narratives that audiences expected. Stevens films civilians cleaning up the rubble, their movements methodical and endless. Brick by brick, stone by stone, they are trying to unbury their city from under the weight of its own destruction. There is something both heroic and futile about their labor, as if they believe that by moving enough stones, they might be able to reconstruct not just Berlin, but some version of the Germany they thought they knew. They just kept working, one American soldier wrote home. Every morning they'd come out and start moving the stones around, like they were trying to rebuild the whole city with their bare hands. I don't know where they thought they were going to put all those bricks. By the time Stevens reached Berlin, he had been filming war for nearly 2 years. He had followed the troops from D-Day, through France, through the liberation of concentration camps, through the grinding advance across Germany. Each mile had changed him. Each reel of film had stripped away another layer of the man who once believed in happy endings. The bombed-out buildings tell their own stories. Apartment blocks, sheared in half, reveal the cross-sections of interrupted lives. A kitchen table still set with dishes, a bedroom with the bed still made, a child's toys scattered across a floor that now opens onto empty air. Stevens's camera doesn't sensationalize these intimate exposures. It simply observes them with the patience of someone who has learned that some truths can only be revealed gradually. The shift in Stevens's work becomes visible when you understand what he had been before the war. In Hollywood, he had been master of the controlled environment. Every light positioned, every shadow calculated, every emotion choreographed to produce the desired effect on audiences. But Berlin presented him with chaos that resisted all attempts at control. Devastation so complete that conventional filmmaking techniques seemed not just inadequate, but almost obscene. So Stevens had learned to become a different kind of director entirely. Not the orchestrator of carefully planned scenes, but the witness to unplannable moments. His Berlin footage moves with the weight of someone who has discovered that some realities are too important to be turned into entertainment, too serious to be anything other than documentary evidence of what human beings are capable of doing to each other. The Olympic Stadium appears in Stevens' footage like a monument to the power of spectacle itself. Built for the 1936 Games, it had been designed to showcase the strength and beauty of the Nazi vision, perfect bodies performing in perfect synchronization for the cameras of Leni Riefenstahl. Now it stands empty, its grandeur reduced to a tourist attraction for Allied officers with cameras. Stevens films himself and his Specu colleagues exploring the stadium, their casual American voices echoing through spaces that had once thundered with choreographed applause. There's something almost surreal about the scene. Hollywood meeting Hitler's Hollywood. One kind of make-believe encountering another kind of manufactured reality. The diving boards still stand over empty pools, their concrete platforms designed for displays of Aryan athleticism, now serving no purpose except to remind visitors of the ambitions that once filled this space. Stevens' camera lingers on the swimming pools, drained of water, filled only with debris and the shadows of morning light. These were meant to be stages for the demonstration of German superiority. Now they are archaeological sites, evidence of a story that convinced an entire nation to commit murder in its name. Watch Stevens and his men walk through the stadium's corridors, and you can hear the weight of history in their footsteps. They move with the casual authority of victors, but Stevens's camera also captures something else. A kind of unease, as if they understand they are walking through the physical remains of a form of madness that was once indistinguishable from patriotism. "It's strange," one of Stevens's men can be heard saying in the footage. You look at this place, and you can almost see the crowds, hear the cheering. But what were they really cheering for? The question hangs in the air like the dust that covers everything in Berlin now. The stadium had been designed to make the Nazi vision seem not just powerful but beautiful, not just political but aesthetic. It had been meant to convince the world that fascism could create something worth celebrating. Now, empty of its intended purpose, it reveals something else. The terrible seductive power of spectacle when it is divorced from conscience. Stevens understood spectacle. He had spent his career creating it, manipulating it, using it to make audiences feel what he wanted them to feel. But the Olympic Stadium confronted him with spectacle's dark potential. What happens when the same techniques used to create entertainment are employed to manufacture consent for atrocity? Then, without warning, Stevens' camera transports us to a beach. The transition is so jarring, it feels like a cut between two different movies. From the echoing emptiness of Nazi architecture to the sound of water lapping against sand. From the weight of historical judgment to the lightness of recreational pleasure. American soldiers lounge in the sun, swim in clear water, laugh at jokes we cannot hear. The contrast with the bombed-out city is so complete, it becomes surreal. How does the human mind move between devastation and vacation, between witnessing genocide and enjoying a day at the beach? Stevens' footage doesn't explain this transition. It simply documents it, leaving viewers to wrestle with the cognitive dissonance. The beach scenes capture something essential about how people survive overwhelming experiences. The need to create moments of normalcy, spaces where the weight of what they have seen can be temporarily set aside. But they also reveal something disturbing about human adaptability, our capacity to compartmentalize experiences that should, by rights, make normal pleasures impossible. The return to Berlin's ruins feels like waking from a dream. Stevens' camera moves again through streets filled with debris, past buildings that have been reduced to shells, among civilians who continue the endless work of trying to make their city habitable again. But something has changed in Stevens' footage. Or perhaps something has changed in our ability to see it. After the beach scenes, the persistence of these civilians takes on a different meaning. Their refusal to surrender to despair, their determination to continue the basic work of human civilization, begins to look less like futility and more like a form of resistance. Watch a woman carefully sweeping broken glass from what used to be a sidewalk. Observe a man methodically stacking salvageable bricks into neat piles. Notice children playing games that transform bomb craters into kingdoms, that turn rubble heaps into mountains to be conquered. They are creating new forms of normalcy within the abnormal, finding ways to be human in circumstances designed to make humanity impossible.
Hold on there, hold on there, hold on. Say, fellas, we're here this afternoon for one specific reason, being making movies. That's right. Let's go. Virginia State, it seems of late, you're always in my dreams.
Stevens' camera captures the strange new social order that has emerged in occupied Berlin. Russian soldiers march in formation through streets that still bear the scars of the battle that brought them here. Their uniforms are clean, their movements precise, but they are walking through a city that looks like the surface of another planet. Uniformed Russian women direct traffic at intersections where traffic lights no longer work, where street signs have been destroyed, where the normal rules of urban navigation have been replaced by military necessity. They stand with the authority of victors, but they too are navigating a landscape that has been transformed beyond recognition. The interaction between occupiers and occupied creates its own peculiar choreography. Stevens films Russian troops encountering Berlin civilians, moments of communication across language barriers, gestures of basic humanity that persist despite the context of defeat and occupation. A Russian soldier sharing a cigarette with an elderly German man. A uniformed woman giving directions to a confused civilian. Small moments of grace that suggest the possibility of something beyond vengeance. But Stevens' camera also captures the underlying tensions. The Russians are liberators and conquerors simultaneously, heroes to the world outside Germany and occupiers to the people who must now live under their authority. The Berliners are victims of their own government's choices and collaborators in their government's crimes, deserving of both sympathy and judgment. Watch the refugees moving through the streets with their belongings. Some German civilians evacuating from areas now under Soviet control, others returning to Berlin from places where they had fled the advancing armies. Each carries the visible weight of personal loss. Suitcases that contain entire lives, carts loaded with furniture salvaged from bombed apartments, children who walk beside their parents through a world that no longer makes sense. Stevens films these movements with the eye of someone who understands that he is documenting not just military occupation, but a massive human migration. Millions of people trying to find their place in a world that has been fundamentally rearranged. These aren't the dramatic crowds of extras you might see in a war movie. They are individuals, each carrying the specific weight of personal displacement. You couldn't tell who was who anymore, one American officer observed. Everybody looked like refugees. The Russians looked like conquerors, but they were also displaced, thousands of miles from home, living in ruins. The Germans looked like victims, but they were also the people who had started the whole thing. And we were supposed to be the good guys, but we were living in beach clubs while families slept in bomb shelters. Stevens' footage captures this moral confusion without trying to resolve it. His camera simply watches as different groups of people try to create some kind of order in a situation that has moved beyond conventional categories of right and wrong, victory and defeat, justice and mercy. Stevens and his assistant Bill Hamilton venture into the Soviet sector, and suddenly the nature of their documentation changes. Hamilton displays Stevens' pass, a document that grants them unrestricted access to move between the zones of occupation. The moment when Hamilton shows this pass to Russian guards becomes a small drama about permission, authority, and the power to observe. The pass is more than bureaucratic permission. It's a license to witness, to transform private moments of military occupation into public historical record. But it also reveals the boundaries that exist even for official observers. Stevens can film in the Soviet sector, but only because Soviet authorities have decided to allow it. His documentation is comprehensive, but it is not complete. It includes only what various powers have decided can be included. Watch Stevens' camera navigate the Soviet sector, and you can see how occupation works at the street level. Russian military vehicles moving through narrow streets, Soviet soldiers posted at guardhouses, signs in Cyrillic script indicating new forms of authority and control. But you can also see how the basic needs of urban life persist, regardless of who is in charge. Water must be distributed, food must be found, children must be cared for, the sick must be treated. The Soviet sector presents Stevens with a different version of the same questions that have haunted his entire Berlin experience. Who has the right to see? Who has the power to determine what gets recorded and what remains hidden? How do individual human stories survive within the larger narratives that nations tell about their actions? Stevens films Soviet troops with the same careful attention he has brought to everything else in Berlin. Not as propaganda subjects, but as individual human beings trying to do their jobs in circumstances that no military training could have prepared them for. These are young men who have traveled thousands of miles from their homes, who have witnessed their own country's devastation at German hands, who are now responsible for maintaining order in a city that seems to exist beyond the normal boundaries of civilization. Stevens's camera finds the river that runs through Berlin, and for a moment, the footage takes on an almost pastoral quality. Water moves past the broken city as it has moved for centuries, indifferent to the human dramas being played out on its banks. The river represents continuity in a landscape that seems to have lost all connection to its own past. But even the river bears the marks of war. Bridges have been destroyed, their stone and steel remains creating new patterns in the water's flow. The riverbanks are littered with debris, pieces of buildings, fragments of vehicles, objects whose origins have become impossible to determine. Stevens films people fishing in the river, their patience and concentration creating small islands of normalcy within the chaos. The act of fishing represents something essential about human persistence. The faith that life continues even when everything else has been destroyed. That the river still contains fish, even though the world above water has been transformed beyond recognition.
I just can't carry on. Where will I go? Where will I stay now that you're gone? I'm standing by the river where it flows down to the sea, and old river seems to be saying this to me. No sun, no song, no dawn. no one to care now that you're gone.
A road sign appears in Stevens's footage, pointing toward Dachau. The sign is simple, bureaucratic, unremarkable, the kind of directional marker that exists on thousands of roads throughout Germany. But this sign carries weight that transforms Stevens's documentation from war reportage into something else entirely. Evidence for history's judgment. Stevens does not film extensively at Dachau itself in this particular reel, but the sign's appearance creates a moment of recognition that changes everything that comes after. This is no longer just documentation of military victory or urban destruction. This is evidence of systematic murder, proof of crimes that go beyond the normal categories of warfare into something for which the world has not yet developed adequate language. The road sign serves as a bridge between Stevens's role as military documentarian and his emerging role as witness to genocide. It announces that his camera is moving from the realm of conventional warfare into territory that will require new forms of moral reckoning, new ways of thinking about what human beings owe each other and what they are capable of doing when those obligations are forgotten. Back in Berlin, Stevens' camera focuses on women working to clear rubble from the streets. This is not the broad documentation of earlier sequences, but concentrated attention on specific acts of reconstruction. Watch their hands as they move broken bricks, their faces as they decide what can be salvaged and what must be discarded. These women represent something that Stevens' Hollywood experience had not prepared him to recognize: the unglamorous heroism of basic survival work. They are not performing for his camera. They are not performing for his camera. They are simply doing what needs to be done to make their city habitable again. Their work is methodical, patient, endless. The kind of labor that makes civilization possible, but that rarely gets celebrated in stories about heroism and victory. The women did most of the work, one American observer noted. The men were dead, or prisoners, or missing. So it was the women who had to figure out how to put the city back together. They worked all day, every day, moving stones that were too heavy for them to lift, clearing streets that seemed impossible to clear. But they kept at it. Stevens' footage captures something essential about reconstruction. It happens not through grand gestures, but through accumulated small acts of persistence. Each brick moved, each pile of debris sorted, each section of street cleared represents a choice to continue existing, to refuse the finality that the destruction seems to demand. Stevens' camera returns to the recreational spaces where Allied personnel have created what they call Beach Club, a surreal oasis of leisure activities within the context of occupation and devastation. The contrast becomes even more jarring on the second viewing. After documenting the labor of reconstruction, the sight of soldiers lounging in the sun takes on a different meaning. This is how occupying armies maintain their psychological equilibrium, by creating spaces where they can temporarily forget what they are occupying, where they can pretend they are on vacation rather than managing the aftermath of genocide. The Beach Club represents a form of compartmentalization that may be necessary for sanity, but that also raises uncomfortable questions about moral responsibility. Watch the soldiers swim, sunbathe, play games on the sand. Their laughter sounds different now that we have seen the women clearing rubble, the refugees carrying their belongings, the endless work of trying to resurrect a murdered city. It's not that their need for recreation is wrong. Human beings require moments of lightness to survive overwhelming experiences. But Stevens' footage forces us to confront the strange mathematics of suffering and pleasure, the way different people's experiences of the same historical moment can exist in completely separate universes. The Beach Club scenes also capture something about American innocence, the ability to create pockets of normalcy even in the most abnormal circumstances, to maintain faith in the possibility of happiness even when surrounded by evidence of humanity's capacity for evil. This innocence is both admirable and troubling, a source of strength and a form of blindness. Stevens' footage shifts abruptly backward in time, from Berlin 1945 to North Africa and Egypt in 1943. The transition is jarring, from the ruins of the Third Reich to the ancient monuments of Egypt, from the end of Stevens' war to its beginning, from documentation of defeat to preparation for victory. Watch Stevens and his cinematographer William Meller at the Sphinx, posing like tourists in front of one of humanity's most enduring monuments to the desire for immortality. The contrast with Berlin could not be more complete. Where Berlin shows what happens when civilizations destroy themselves, the Sphinx represents the human drive to create something that will outlast the people who created it. But Stevens' Egypt footage also reveals something about how the war began for him. Not with moral urgency, but with adventure. Not with the weight of bearing witness, but with the excitement of documenting American power in exotic locations. The North African campaign appears in his early footage as a kind of grand adventure story, complete with staged military exercises, tanks moving across desert landscapes, and troops marching in formation, accompanied by military bands. "We thought we were filming the good war," one of Stevens' colleagues remembered years later. Clean victories, clear enemies, American boys showing the world what democracy could do. It all seemed so straightforward then. The Egyptian sequences show Stevens before he understood what he would be called upon to witness, before his camera learned to see the difference between warfare and genocide, between military victory and moral reckoning. Watch him film staged combat scenarios in the African desert, explosions choreographed for maximum visual impact, troop movements designed to demonstrate American tactical superiority, scenes that transform war into spectacle. This is Stevens still working, essentially as a Hollywood director, creating dramatic scenes that will help audiences back home understand the war as a story with heroes and villains, clear moral lines, and inevitable victory for the forces of good. His camera moves with confidence. His staging is precise. His eye for dramatic composition never wavers. But knowing what Stevens will later witness in Europe makes these Egyptian scenes feel almost innocent. The work of a man who still believes that war can be documented without being fundamentally changed by what documentation reveals. The Steven who films staged tank battles in North Africa has not yet met the Stevens who will walk through the gates of concentration camps, who will document piles of human bodies, who will film the survivors of systematic murder. The transition between the Egyptian footage and the Berlin documentation reveals the arc of Stevens' transformation, from entertainer to witness, from someone who uses his camera to create compelling stories to someone who uses his camera to preserve unbearable truths. The war changed everyone who lived through it, but perhaps it changed artists most of all, forcing them to discover whether their skills could serve purposes more serious than entertainment. Stevens films American pilots preparing for missions, their faces young and confident, their conversations focused on technical details and tactical concerns. These men are preparing to fight what they believe is a conventional war against a conventional enemy. They have not yet learned what they will discover as they advance across Europe, that they are fighting something unprecedented, something that will require them to develop new categories of moral thinking. The staged military exercises that Stevens documents in Egypt reveal the American military's confidence in its own power and righteousness. Watch the precision of the tank maneuvers, the coordination of the infantry advances, the careful choreography of modern warfare conducted by democratic armies. Everything suggests competence, organization, the ability to project power across vast distances in service of moral causes. But this confidence, documented so carefully by Stevens' camera, also contains the seeds of the moral complications that will emerge later. The same organizational skills that make American military victory possible will also make American soldiers responsible for deciding what to do with the aftermath of genocide. The same technological superiority that allows Americans to defeat fascist armies will also confront Americans with evidence of fascist crimes that technology cannot solve. Stevens' Egyptian footage preserves a moment of moral clarity that will not survive contact with the realities of European warfare. The Americans in Africa are liberators without ambiguity, heroes in a story with clear lines between good and evil. But the Americans who will occupy Berlin will discover that victory creates its own moral complexities, that defeating evil does not automatically create good, that liberation can be indistinguishable from occupation, depending on your point of view. The final sequences return to Stevens at the Sphinx, contemplating one of humanity's most ancient symbols of permanence and mystery. The monument has survived for millennia, outlasting the civilization that created it, bearing witness to centuries of human ambition and failure. Standing before it, Stevens seems to be preparing for his own role as witness, learning to see with the long perspective that will be required to document what humanity is capable of doing to itself. Watch Stevens' final shots of the Egyptian desert. Vast expanses of sand, punctuated by traces of human passage. Landscapes that dwarf individual human dramas, while preserving evidence of every army that has ever passed through them. This is the perspective that Stevens will bring to Berlin. The ability to see individual human suffering within the context of historical processes larger than any single person's experience. The capacity to document horror without losing sight of the larger human story of which that horror is only one chapter. The footage ends with Stevens preparing to leave Egypt for Europe, his camera packed with film that captures American confidence at the moment, before that confidence will be tested by encounters with evil, more systematic and comprehensive than anything the world has seen before. He is still the Hollywood director who knows how to make reality look like the stories audiences expect to see. But he is about to become something else entirely. A man whose camera will preserve evidence that future generations will need to understand what they are capable of becoming and what they are capable of preventing. Stevens' journey from the Sphinx to Berlin, from 1943 to 1945, from Hollywood entertainment to historical documentation, represents more than one man's transformation. It represents the transformation of America itself, from a nation that could still believe in the possibility of clean victories to a nation forced to confront the reality of dirty triumphs. From a people who could see themselves as simple heroes to a people compelled to recognize their role in a world where heroism and complicity often exist in the same moment. The camera that began by documenting American power in the Egyptian desert ended by preserving evidence of human capacity for both creation and destruction, for both bearing witness and looking away, for both remembering and forgetting. Stevens' Berlin footage exists now in the archives not just as historical record, but as moral challenge. A reminder that every generation must choose what it will see, what it will document, what it will preserve for the future's judgment. In the end, Stevens' transformation from comedy director to war documentarian represents the transformation that the entire world underwent during those years. The discovery that modernity's technical capabilities could serve either civilization or its destruction. That the same tools used to create entertainment could be essential for preserving truth. That the difference between art and evidence might depend entirely on what history demands from the people who happen to be holding cameras when the world changes forever.